To a modern economist, religion looks like a glitch in the system. From a purely materialistic perspective, it is a massive allocation of resources toward unproductive ends. Every year, billions of people donate trillions of dollars to religious institutions. They spend billions of hours in prayer, build massive structures that serve no industrial purpose, and adhere to restrictive lifestyle choices, like fasting or celibacy, that seem to run counter to biological and economic self-interest. In the cold logic of the market, this is what we call a sunk cost. If a firm behaved this way, it would be bankrupt within a quarter. If an individual behaved this way, we would call their financial planning irrational. It is, on the surface, a system that asks you to give everything and receive nothing tangible in return. But there is a catch. If religion were truly a competitive disadvantage, it would have been out-evolved thousands of years ago. In the Darwinian struggle of civilizations, inefficient systems are replaced by efficient ones. Yet, for the vast majority of human history, the most powerful, stable, and expansive civilizations were not those that abandoned religion, but those that were most deeply integrated with it. To understand why, we have to look past the theology and look at the mechanics. When we do, we find that religion isn't just a matter of faith. It is one of the most successful economic innovations in human history. It solved the free rider problem. It pioneered the concept of the perpetual corporation. It created high-trust trade networks that functioned before the invention of the police, and it provided a form of soul insurance that incentivized the very behaviors, like honesty and delayed gratification, that make modern capitalism possible. To understand the modern world, we first have to understand the divine economy. In economics, this is known as the free rider problem. In any group effort, there is a rational incentive for individuals to do as little as possible while reaping the maximum reward. If everyone acts rationally and waits for someone else to do the work, the well never gets dug, and the village dies of thirst. This is the fundamental friction of human civilization. How do you get a group of selfish individuals to work for a collective benefit? For ancient societies, the stakes were existential. Cooperation wasn't just a nice-to-have. It was the difference between survival and extinction. But how do you know who you can trust? If you are building a city or defending a border, how do you know that the person next to you isn't a free rider who will flee the moment things get difficult? This brings us to the economics of sacrifice. At first glance, the rules of religion, dietary restrictions, specific dress codes, or grueling rituals seem like unnecessary burdens. But in economic terms, these are high entry costs. They function as a screening mechanism. Think of a religion like an exclusive club. If a club is free to join and has no rules, it will be flooded with people looking for a handout. The quality of the network stays low because no one has skin in the game. But if the club requires you to give up 10% of your income and spend every Saturday morning in a temple, a free rider isn't going to join. The cost is too high for someone who isn't serious. By making the entry cost high, a religion filters out low-commitment members. What remains is a high-trust network. Everyone inside that network knows that everyone else has paid a significant price to be there. They have proof of work. To understand the power of this, we have to look at transaction costs. In the ancient world, trade was incredibly risky. If you sent a shipment of silk from one end of a continent to the other, there was a high probability you'd be robbed or cheated. There were no international courts to sue a partner who lived 1,000 miles away. But if you were part of a religious network, a club good, the dynamics changed. You weren't just trading with a stranger, you were trading with a brother. If they cheated you, they wouldn't just lose a business partner. They would be expelled from the high-trust network and face divine consequences. The weird rules were actually a brand. They were a signal of reliability. Because you were willing to sacrifice for your group, I know you are more likely to honor our contract. This allowed for the first truly global trade networks to flourish long before the first modern governments could provide security. Beyond trust, religion provided something else the ancient world lacked: standardization. Before the modern state, the world was a chaotic patchwork of local customs. Every city had its own weights, its own measures, and its own way of telling time. For a merchant, this was a nightmare. It was like trying to run a global internet, where every computer used a different, incompatible language. The friction was so high that it stifled large-scale growth. Religion functioned as a protocol, a common language for interaction. Consider the concept of the pilgrimage. Every year, millions of people from vastly different cultures and languages would travel to a single location. On paper, this is a massive waste of travel time, but in reality, it was the world's first global trade fair. Because everyone was under a sacred peace, violence and theft were strictly forbidden in these zones. This created a safe zone for commerce that the secular world couldn't yet provide. People didn't just bring prayers, they brought textiles, spices, and ideas. Furthermore, the religious calendar provided a synchronized schedule for the entire civilization. Everyone knew exactly when a major festival would happen because it was tied to the liturgical calendar. This allowed merchants to coordinate their movements and farmers to time their markets across vast distances. By providing a common language, a common calendar, and a common set of ethical standards, religion functioned as the TCP/IP of the ancient world. It was the underlying code that allowed different local networks to talk to each other, creating an integrated economy that spanned borders. Most human endeavors are fragile because humans are mortal. This is the dynastic cycle of business. A brilliant entrepreneur builds a fortune, but his children squander it, or his grandchildren argue over the inheritance until the firm is liquidated. In the ancient world, the family business was the standard economic unit, but it was a unit with a built-in expiration date. But religion solved this by creating the first perpetual corporations. Consider the monastic orders or the religious endowments known as waqfs. These were legal entities that could own land, collect rent, and accumulate capital forever. Unlike a king, a temple doesn't die. Unlike a merchant, a religious order doesn't have heirs who want to sell off the assets to buy wine and horses. The Cistercian monks in the 12th century Europe are a perfect case study in this economic immortality. Because they were a perpetual organization, they could engage in long-term capital investments that no individual or family could afford. They could think in centuries, not seasons. They built massive drainage systems that took 50 years to finish. They pioneered industrial-scale wool production and iron smelting. They became, in effect, the first industrial firms. Because their shareholders, the monks, had taken vows of poverty, the profits weren't spent on luxury or inherited by children. They were reinvested back into the firm. This led to a massive accumulation of capital. For the first time, wealth wasn't being scattered by death. It was being concentrated and compounded over generations. The legal DNA of the modern corporation, the idea that an organization can be a legal person distinct from the people who run it, is a direct descendant of these religious frameworks. The idea that a company can own property, sign contracts, and exist independently of its founders was a theological innovation before it was a commercial one. Religious institutions were the world's first multinational firms, managing portfolios of assets that survived for thousands of years. This is perhaps the most subtle but powerful economic function of religion. In any economy, you have to deal with information asymmetry. You know if you are being honest, but I don't. To prevent you from cheating me, I have to monitor you. But monitoring is incredibly expensive. Maintaining a police force, a court system, and a bureaucracy of auditors requires an enormous amount of taxes. But what if you could outsource that monitoring to the individual's own conscience? To an economist, the concept of a punishing God, or karma, is a brilliant incentive structure. It moves the punishment for bad behavior from the physical world to the metaphysical one. It turns the entire universe into an inescapable auditing system. This is what researchers call the Big God hypothesis. As societies grew too large for everyone to know each other, they needed a way to ensure that people would behave honestly, even when no one was watching. By internalizing the auditor, by convincing the population that an invisible, all-knowing force was recording every transaction, the cost of law enforcement dropped significantly. It turned out that believing in an afterlife ledger was a very efficient way to run a city. It encouraged pro-social behavior, honesty, charity, and rule-following among strangers. It allowed people to trade on a handshake because they both believed the ledger was being kept by a force much more powerful than a local judge. This also encouraged delayed gratification. The core of all economic growth is the ability to save today for a better tomorrow. By framing moral behavior as a long-term investment in your eternal credit score, religion incentivized the exact psychological traits necessary for capital accumulation. You don't steal today because you want to prosper in the next life. In doing so, you make the current life more stable for everyone. Today, we like to think we've moved past the divine economy. We have secular laws, state-run social safety nets, and sophisticated credit scores. We don't need a temple to build a hospital, and we don't need the fear of the afterlife to keep us from stealing, or so we tell ourselves. We view our modern institutions as purely rational products of the Enlightenment. But the point is, the structures we rely on today are the secular descendants of these religious innovations. We haven't replaced the system. We've just rebranded it. The high-trust networks of religious guilds paved the way for the modern stock exchange. The perpetual endowments of the ancient world became the blueprint for the modern university and the multi-billion-dollar foundation. Even the concept of credit, from the Latin credere, meaning to believe, reminds us that all economic value is, at its heart, an act of faith. Religion solved the most difficult problems of human organization: trust, capital duration, and social monitoring, before we had the technology to do it any other way. It provided the social glue that allowed us to scale from small tribes into global civilizations. We may have changed the currency, and we may have changed the names on the buildings, but we are still operating within the same framework. We still trade in trust. We still build institutions meant to outlive us. And we still look for ways to ensure that everyone follows the rules, even when no one is watching. In the end, the history of religion isn't just a history of what we believe. It's a history of how we learn to work together at scale. Because whether you're looking at a cathedral or a central bank, the principle remains the same. An economy only works when we all believe in something bigger than ourselves. If you found this analysis of social systems interesting, you might enjoy our other videos on how the structures of the past shape our present. You can support the channel by subscribing. Your support allows us to keep digging into the systems that run our world. The point is, the system is older than you think. Thanks for watching.